1972, in the House of Flowers, I believe it was October, just after Rath Yatra, it might have been September of 1972, I was at a lecture that Srila Prabhupada was giving. And this lecture was kind of significant. Bhutatma was fanning Srila Prabhupada on a stage. There were maybe 1,000, 1,200 people there, an indoor auditorium with a stage. And Bhutatma was fanning Srila Prabhupada with a peacock fan, and the handle of the peacock fan was more than 12 feet long. It was this humongous, like something out of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And as they were fanning Srila Prabhupada, I was trying to listen very carefully. It was hard at first to understand what Srila Prabhupada was saying. But I remember specifically there was one point that Srila Prabhupada had come to at the question and answer section of his lecture that really gave me inspiration that here is my guru. Because previously I was, like everyone else, looking for so many spiritual masters, going through TM and Autobiography of a Yogi and Baba Ram Das and everything. And when Srila Prabhupada spoke, at one point in the question and answers, one young man stood up and said, Swamiji, according to the teachings of Baha'i, Srila Prabhupada interrupted and said, we are not talking here of Baha'i, we are talking of Krishna. And he said, well, Bahula says, and Prabhupada interrupted him immediately again, we are interested in here, and we are talking here of what Krishna says. And then he said again, well, the Baha'i faith, and Prabhupada said, please sit down and be quiet. We are speaking only what Krishna says. And to me, at that time, when I'd seen all these other bogus yogis and they were accepting everything and putting everything together as one, I was never very attracted. And when I heard that Prabhupada was so decisive and strict and very forceful, I immediately thought that this is my guru. I want to take initiation from this spiritual master. So then I joined sometime later. That's another story, but that impressed me very much, that first meeting with Srila Prabhupada in the House of Flowers. At another time in 1976, Gopavindapal Prabhu had asked us to guard Srila Prabhupada's door in Vrindavan, which was a great honor to be able to guard Srila Prabhupada's door. At the same time, no one ever thought Srila Prabhupada would come out and say anything or have any conversation. We were rank and file devotees. No big guns, no one who was in a GBC meeting or made any decisions, especially at that time. Rank and file Prabhus. And so Srila Prabhupada was in his rooms in Vrindavan, and it was the time for all the devotees to go to the Fogel ashram for prasadam, 12:30, 1 o'clock. I was sitting on the porch. I didn't know what Prabhupada's rooms were like at that time. Neither did I know if any other servants were there. And all of a sudden there was a buzzer from inside the room. And I kept reading. It was the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I thought, this is wonderful. I'm in Vrindavan. I'm reading the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada's in his room. He just rang the buzzer. Some servant from somewhere is going to go and take care of it. You know, everything's so wonderful in Vrindavan. And all of a sudden, within a few seconds, Srila Prabhupada was at the screen door, there in his quarters in Vrindavan. And I immediately stood up. I went to offer obeisances, and Prabhupada said, I am an old man, and I am ringing, and you are a young man, and I must come to you? And my heart, I looked at you, Prabhupada, I had no idea. I tried to explain, you know, that I was new to this job. I had no idea what was the room. Prabhupada said, I am the spiritual master, and you are the disciple, and I must come to you? And again, I couldn't even say anything. I was struck. Prabhupada said, I am the master, and you are the servants, and there are 6 of you. I couldn't even understand what Prabhupada was talking about. There are 6 of us. And I must come to you? And then Prabhupada said, go get Pusta Krishna. So I knew Prabhupada went back in his room, and I knew adrenaline was flowing like anything. I had barely ever had any association with Srila Prabhupada face to face. And Srila Prabhupada was, this was one of the first encounters, and I had blown it major. So I immediately was ready to run to go get Pusta Krishna Maharaj at the Fogel Ashram. But I realized that if I left my guard, my post as guard, that something could happen and I would be responsible. So I was waiting for some devotee to come by. One devotee came by. I yelled at him, please come quickly. We've got to get Pusta Krishna. Prabhupada needs him. And unfortunately, he said, no entiendo, Prabhu. He spoke only Spanish. At the time, I didn't speak too much Spanish. And the buzzer rang again. So I ran into Srila Prabhupada's quarters. I had never been there before in Vrindavan. I offered obeisances, and as I'm offering obeisances, Prabhupada said, where's Pusta Krishna? So I immediately stood up before I finished my obeisances because I didn't want Prabhupada to have to wait for my answer. I was feeling very foolish. I didn't know what to do, which way to go, what to say. And I told Srila Prabhupada, he's at the Fogel Ashram taking prashadam. Prabhupada said, go in the back and get one of the other servants. So as I walked in the back, there are two doorways. One leads to the back of Vrindavan, Prabhupada's rooms in Vrindavan. One leads to the servants' quarters. And unfortunately, I entered the servants' quarters. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, the other door. And I realized then that one should feel like a fool in front of the spiritual master, but one shouldn't act like a fool before the spiritual master. So I went and I got, Harisari was there in the back, preparing some prasadam, doing some devotional service for Srila Prabhupada. And I told him, Srila Prabhupada needs you immediately. You've got to come quickly. It's an emergency. He said, okay, go around through this little doorway, go around the front again, and keep guarding. And I'll tell you what to do. I'll go take care of everything. I'll go talk to Srila Prabhupada. So I went to my post, and I was still reading the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, but this time my eyes were bugged out of my head. I couldn't even read a word. I was looking at the pages, but my mind was reeling in complete anxiety that I had offended Srila Prabhupada. I hadn't pleased him. What an opportunity. And here I had blown it in service of my spiritual master. So Pusta Krishna Maharaj at that time came back, and he told me, you'll do something nice for Prabhupada. We found out that Prabhupada wanted to go to Bhagavad-gita's across the way for lunch prasadam. It wasn't as big as an emergency as I had thought. Although Srila Prabhupada needed the arrangements to be made. So Pusta Krishna Maharaj told me that just hold this nice umbrella. There was a very big umbrella with a 3-foot, 4-foot pole. Hold it over Srila Prabhupada's head and you can do some nice service. Walk Srila Prabhupada over to Bhagavad-gita's house. So as I'm getting prepared to do that, Srila Prabhupada was coming out in a few minutes. The kirtan started. A few sannyasis came by, and two of the senior sannyasis, at that time Guru Kripa Maharaj and Yasodananda Swami, came by and saw me with the pole and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, Srila Prabhupada's coming out, and I'm going to put the umbrella over his head and walk him to Bhagavad-gita's. And of course, being a brahmachari, they pulled rank immediately, took the umbrella from my hands, and they were going to perform that service, which was only appropriate. So then I'm walking down the stairs, joining in the kirtan, maybe half a dozen devotees, 10 devotees there, and I realized that Krishna was just arranging. There was nothing I can do to please my spiritual master, that I had just blown a great opportunity. So I was actually crying. I think physically I was crying as Srila Prabhupada came out. I offered dandabats on the stairs, 3-4 stairs going to the gate, leading outside to go to Bhagavad-gita's across the alley in Vrindavan. And as I'm offering obeisances, offering dandabats, Srila Prabhupada's coming down the stairs. I didn't even plan it. As I'm coming up, I was crying, my mind was reeling, that Prabhupada, please forgive me. I'm so sorry that I offended you or didn't know how to act properly. And as I stood up, hands folded, Srila Prabhupada looked over and said, Jai. To me. I knew it was to me. Prabhupada said, Jai. And I knew at that moment, all the anxiety, all the fear, all the tears were all washed away. I became completely joyous because I knew that Srila Prabhupada knew my heart. He knew my intentions, and that he was forgiving me for whatever offense that I had committed. And then Srila Prabhupada went on to Bhagavad-gita, and I was in ecstasy for the rest of that day at least. But Lokanath Maharaj was there on the walk. Srila Prabhupada had asked him at one point of the walk what these particular type of berries on the side of the road were. And Lokanath Maharaj was describing that these are such and such berries. Great yogis and sannyasis subsist on the berries, perform meditation and subsist on these berries for their foodstuffs only. Prabhupada said, yes, our men should learn how to do like this. Chant Hare Krishna, eat a few berries, and once in a week, go down to the village and beg a chapati from the village. So devotees were looking at each other because sometimes Srila Prabhupada would give instructions that would change everyone's life forever. Go to China or who knows. Srila Prabhupada was our guru, he could say anything. So immediately a few of the GBC men, maybe some of the householders, said, well, Prabhupada, we have to preach, we have to go back and perform our activities. Prabhupada said, no, you should learn to be able to do like this. Chant Hare Krishna, eat few berries, sit in the forest, and once in a week go down to the village and beg some chapati. And devotees everyone was very silent. They thought, my God, we may have to do this. And then Prabhupada went on to say, of course, Lokanath Maharaj was very happy. He was hoping that this would be, I think he was hoping this would be one instruction as a very austere, saintly person. Prabhupada then said, this is sadhu. This is saintly. We should be able to do like this. This is the life of a sadhu. So that was kind of a significant little pastime with Lokanath Maharaj and Prabhupada. Another time, in 76, in Mayapur, we were in a little room conversation with Srila Prabhupada. He was speaking mostly in Hindi. We were there in the front row. It was a very small room in Sridham Mayapur. And people were being asked to come in and then go out. And Mahabodhi Prabhu was at the door giving people the instruction, who should come in, who should go out. At a certain point during the darshan, a big plate of sweets came into the room. Mahabodhi was holding onto the sweets. A few people noticed there was a very large plate of sweets. So Srila Prabhupada stopped his darshan and asked Mahabodhi, why don't you pass out these sweets? And Mahabodhi responded that, well, Srila Prabhupada, I'll pass out the sweets as they all leave, as the devotees leave. And Prabhupada was sitting with one knee up, I remember. We were there in the front row with Tripurari Maharaj. And Prabhupada looked around and said, leave? They will never leave. And everybody in the audience was, Jai Prabhupada. Everyone was, considered that that was a blessing that Prabhupada was giving. Of course, making a joke also. 1976 in New Vrindavan, we were fortunate to be in a darshan with Srila Prabhupada. It was the darshans during when Prabhupada was lecturing on the Bhavan Journal, which became the book Civilization and Transcendence. Prabhupada was there were questions from the Bhavan Journal, and Srila Prabhupada was giving the answers outdoors at one householder's place in New Vrindavan, summer of 1976. And during this time, Srila Prabhupada had been lecturing the devotees that they should know the books like a lawyer knows his law books. We should study the books very carefully. And at that time, I believe, 76, summer, it was still 7th canto had just come out. Devotees didn't know most of those verses from the Prahlad pastimes. So Srila Prabhupada came to a point in the lecture where he was giving some discussion on the teachings of Prahlad. And he said, so go find that verse. I think it was maybe Naivodvijay Paraduratya Vaitaranyas, which was new to devotees at that time. 7th canto had just come out. Some verse that was new to devotees. So the sannyasis were feverishly going through the books, Drishtadyumna Maharaj, Kirtananda Swami, because they knew the days previous, Srila Prabhupada had become little bit disturbed when the devotees couldn't find the verses properly, and had given that quote, learn the books like a lawyer knows his law books. So devotees were feverishly looking through the book. They couldn't find it. Maybe 3-4 minutes. Many devotees were here to witness this. I know Naikatma was with us, and many devotees. I think it's even Harisari told this story in his diary. Srila Prabhupada then asked, we were all very amazed, give me the book. They gave Srila Prabhupada the book. He opened the book very nonchalantly and handed it to one of his servants and said, read. And then they read the exact verse that Srila Prabhupada had quoted. And devotees were amazed. Prabhupada didn't, the place was not marked. Prabhupada simply took the book, opened it, it was right there. Devotees in amazement at this transcendental magic, at Srila Prabhupada's abilities. In unison, everyone was, Jai Prabhupada. And I remember Prabhupada put his head back, and Acha, it was a very, Prabhupada was smiling and put his head back, yes. We were all extremely amazed. Still, it's amazing story. Thinking that sometimes all the other devotees, the servants would leave and I would be there fanning Srila Prabhupada. And I was thinking at one time, how is it that the spiritual master is sleeping? The Shastra says that the spiritual master never sleeps. So I was speculating and perhaps bothering Srila Prabhupada on a psychic level. Prabhupada was sitting there on his bed cross-legged in the inner veranda, the outer veranda on the outside in his rooms upstairs in Vrindavan. And he was seemingly snoring and in deep sleep. Lip was moving back and forth, and I thought, Prabhupada's snoring, he's sleeping. But I thought the spiritual master never sleeps. And as I'm thinking this nonsense, right in the middle of my thought, as Srila Prabhupada's snoring, he said, what time is it? Completely clear and attentive. And I realized then that Srila Prabhupada knew exactly what I was thinking and wanted to destroy that thought. 8:33 Srila Prabhupada. And immediately in my mind I just, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. I realized I shouldn't think anything in front of my spiritual master except Krishna conscious thoughts, love and devotion, and the Maha Mantra, chanting of Hare Krishna. We did write one letter. I was a Sankirtan devotee, so in those days we were told, don't bother Srila Prabhupada, he's busy translating, he's busy traveling, just any questions that you have, any problems, go to your local GBC, talk to the sannyasis. So in 1974, after we were already initiated, we were doing Sankirtan in Spokane at the Spokane World's Fair I think it was April of 1974. And there were many Sankirtan devotees that were there doing the book distribution there. So the temple president had written one letter to Srila Prabhupada inviting him to come and speak at the World's Fair. And then we had written a letter from the Sankirtan side giving Srila Prabhupada the information of how many books were being distributed and how the Sankirtan was going there at that time. This was the only letter we really ever wrote to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada responded in a letter a few weeks later in 1974, April of 74, that to the questions of the temple president, the invitation of the temple president, he responded that if you simply distribute my books, distribute prasadam, and have Harinam, it will be as good as my personally being there. And then from our letter, it was a response that we've never forgotten, a response that we were waiting to hear some kind of instruction like this, direct instruction. Prabhupada had said in that letter that I'm very keen on the distribution of my books, and I'm ever indebted to all of you for your untiring efforts to see that every man and woman in the United States gets a book. So Of course, when we got this letter, any letters that we heard from Srila Prabhupada to anyone were extremely enlivening and gave us purpose and direction. And this particular letter, many of the devotees that were there, Savas Prabhu and Tripurari Maharaj at the time, so many book distributors, Magendra was there from here, a lot of devotees that are around, they took this, that this is their mission for Srila Prabhupada throughout this lifetime, to make sure that every man and woman in the United States gets a book. So that was a nice letter, a very nice letter in '74. So I believe that one Mataji had asked Srila Prabhupada a question about the women being very aggressive. Of course, I think this came up in a letter also, but I believe that this came up at that time also. And Srila Prabhupada responded that, yes, we should, for the Matajis, he was giving instruction, we can be a lion on the chase and a lamb at home. At that same time, Srila Prabhupada was shown a very famous cartoon that was in the Chicago Sun-Times, I believe, that summer. We had just received it. It had just come out, as a matter of fact. And I believe Jayatirtha gave the cartoon, showed the cartoon to Srila Prabhupada. And in the first frame of the cartoon, it showed a devotee approaching a traveler, a passenger, at the airport or in some spot. The second frame showed the passenger, denying the book, not wanting to take it. In the third frame of the cartoon, there was the scuffle, pow, bam, kaboom. In the next frame, it showed the Bhagavatam, the book, in the traveler's neck, down the traveler's neck, and the devotee walking away, I believe, counting some money. So we were fearful that Srila Prabhupada would find this offensive and would be upset with our zealousness in distributing by seeing this caricature of the devotee's distribution. But on the contrary, Srila Prabhupada laughed and seemed to be amused and pleased with the cartoon. When they would read the letters to Srila Prabhupada, there were a few letters that were very outstanding. I remember one letter that they had read, we had the fortune of being there when they would read the letters to Srila Prabhupada. And one letter they were discussing of the preaching activities of Srila Prabhupada's disciples in Yugoslavia. And they had given description of how the people would leave with their, would be given prasad, harinam, and books. And as they would leave with their hands full of books, their stomachs full of prasadam, and their purses emptied. And Srila Prabhupada responded, this was my program. Hands full, stomachs full, and purses emptied. Prabhupada said, that's my program. And then Prabhupada said that when I hear the stories of their preaching, I forget about my diseased condition. It makes me feel very happy. And another time there was some different achievements that were taking place, a restaurant that had been opened in South Africa, another activity that was going on, and Srila Prabhupada said, when I hear of the achievements of my disciples, my chest swells with pride for them. So there were little statements at that time that Srila Prabhupada was making that were, that ring through, and will ring through, I'm sure, for decades and centuries.
Je anilo premadana koruna prachu